ITAD in 15 panel webinar. I'm joined today by Fredrik Forslund from Blancco and James Derrick from Blackmore. And we're going to be talking about data sanitization. And the tagline is, "Are standards being deleted?" Fred, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Give us a little bit of background about, Blancco's heavily certified from a sanitization perspective. Give us a background on where these certifications have come from and what standards they're backed off to.
Absolutely. And we need to take a big leap back in history here to see the full picture. There's still a lot of talk about the Department of Defense as a reference algorithm, for example. Then we need to realize that that's something that was done in the mid-90s when the focus was only on magnetic spinning drives. We've seen a huge development on the SSD side. There was some anxiety in the industry in the first early years because there were so many inconsistencies from the manufacturers. But if we look at where we are today, NIST 800-88, even though it has a number of years since it was released, has become sort of the benchmark when it comes to best possible public guidelines. But then as a vendor, you have to go meet and exceed those and go beyond, because there's so much development in the market, new drive interfaces, etc. So we still talk about achieving purge, achieving absolutely 100% sanitization. That must be the goal when you have an Erasure certificate being issued at the end of the process. But we need to be very careful on how we lean on different standards. And some people claim that they have been NIST certified. There's no certification from NIST, for example. So you need to look at the terminology. You need to understand the history. But the good news is that you can do very much 100% security if you come in from the right angles. So that's a short review of the last 25 years, Steve.
James, from Blackmore are an ITAD, so they're a processor and they sanitize media. From the coalface, James, what are you seeing in terms of customer expectation on sanitization standards?
Well, it's an interesting split in a way, because the approach of smaller organizations is just potentially one of confusion, really. The standards that do exist are both dated and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're really written more for interdepartmental government understanding of how to approach their own concerns with data, and then they've either been presented to the public or just generally delivered to the private sector in a way that the terminology just doesn't make sense to people. So, we find ourselves having to almost translate these things to terms that can be understood by the end users. Otherwise, there is that tendency to sort of leap towards the destructive techniques. It's just an absence of understanding, really. And that's certainly not getting any better as technology is marching forward and these standards aren't keeping up with it.
I think that's interesting. And Fred, I'm going to pick up on my favorite, the USDOD standard, which stopped being maintained in 2006, but it is still quoted. And we see EN 15713 quoted as a destruction standard, even though it's technically flawed. NIST 888, people say I'm compliant with it, but they don't understand it's an 80-page document and that there are different options. Even if you say purge, there are different techniques to achieve purge. The piece that you mentioned, I've seen NIST 888 certified. There is no certification, and we'd have to start looking at the commands which the software are presenting to the drive to verify it. And all of this is creating concern, James, from your customers, because they just largely want to be told what to do.
If you look at, like, in the DPA 2018, there's plenty of references to right to erasure, but there's not actually anything that goes alongside that. It explains exactly what they mean by erasure and how that can be achieved successfully. It's left to the data controllers to come up with their own toms that how they'd approach that.
And it would make sense that they should point at standards and certifications where certification body, so I'm talking about my own company, and they should have a degree of confidence that it means something. Now, Fred, from your perspective, I'm not saying that Blancco collects badges, but it's a very significant array of approvals that you've got. There are different requirements in different countries, despite the media being the same. Have you got a gut feel for why this is the case?
Yeah, I mean, you've had some very advanced government slash military security organizations that might have been given a task from the legislator or whoever in the nation, that this is something that we want you to look into, and we want you to come out with German guidelines, for example. You have the BSI in Germany. So they have been looking at what they believe is the best practice, and they have issued, you have to fulfill these requirements, and this is how you achieve BSI level sanitization. So when you're a global player, you need to be able to cater to all different flavors, because we've seen initiatives in the UK, in Germany, in Asia, in North America. And basically, you have to be prepared that corporate security policy might refer to one of those programs. And then we have to document how can we live up to that specific requirement, like BSI in Germany, for example.
And it's interesting because storage is being used in different ways now. And some of the standards, and this is 2016, IS5 was the same year, I believe. Some of these standards are now getting dated quite quickly. So let's talk about hybrid drives. And the techniques that should be applied to hybrid drives are great if I can see it, because they physically look the same. And unless your customers are telling you that the hybrid drive is within the estate that they're disposing of, the software itself has to be very, very clever, because it will mount it as a single storage block, and actually it will behave like that unless it's configured in a certain different way. Now, James, from your perspective, you probably never know that a hybrid drive is going through unless you're using a software that flags it up to say, I know that this is a hybrid drive. I looked the model. I think, Blancco, this is what you guys do, isn't it? And it says, yes, I'm a hybrid drive, so I know how to behave. You'd never know, though, James, would you?
No, and certainly, even further upstream, our clients wouldn't know a lot of the time. But indeed, they're not always. Occasionally, it's in the notation on the front of the drive, but it's inconsistent. Depends on the vendor.
So if we're building specifications into sanitization and standards, and I'm saying must be compliant with X, if X is not impossible, but very challenging in the real world to comply with, the standards aren't fit for purpose, because they're telling me something which I've got no means of complying with, because I'm not aware that it exists, where hybrid drives are concerned. Let's talk IoT, slightly different. So we were approached by a retailer recently to try and help them with looking at how they sanitize some of the store returns on smart TVs and things like that. It's an entirely different usage for storage media, and some of the techniques that NIST 888 require you to do, they're not possible because you can't mount storage media in the normal way. And so are we thinking, Fredrik, and because you guys are way ahead of the curve for the most in this, are you looking at how storage media is being implemented into technologies and looking at how your software can be used in those scenarios? Because the standards aren't moving in that area.
No, it's a constant race. So we have input from the market around the world. So when there's a critical mass around a specific asset platform, for example, we invest a big R&D budgets into verifying, is this something that we can process? Can we achieve 100% security? Can we achieve a commercially scalable process so that you can actually achieve volume production? And does it make commercial sense to launch this at this time? So if you look back through history, there's constantly new platforms that are being sort of included in the Erasure opportunity scope. Chromebooks has been a massive investment lately to make sure that we can help partners and customers to process those in a secure way. And I foresee that, just like you're saying, Steve, with IoT, etc., we're going to see continuous demand to add We've added smart watches. There will be more smart things to add as we go into the future. So that will continue. But there is also initiatives on the standardization side to update frameworks, guidelines that you can lean on as an industry, where some great minds are looking at updating basically NIST 800-88 into a more modern framework, covering more aspects and clarifying a few things that have created confusion over the time. So there's work both on standard side and also operational side.
Let's pick up on the confusion, because James, this is one of the biggest issues I know that you guys have, which is we're quite happy to comply with customer requirements, but sometimes they're wrong. And I've got to have a point of reference to politely tell them that they're wrong.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
still see, I mean, this is some of my frustrations and jump in. We still see CESG being bandied around, even though it was disbanded in 2016, 2017, which is now into NCSC, National Cybersecurity Centre. We still see you must use a CPA approved product, even though that approval is only on magnetic hard drives.
Yeah.
The CPA scheme itself is dying. So I believe Blancco and UWipe are the last two products certified by NCSC. James, what do you think your customers are going to do when the CPA scheme ceases and there's no more approved products? Where will they go to?
Well, the optimist in me would say that they would rely on professionals within the ITAD industry to actually, take the lead on that. The optimist in me is quite small, though, compared to the rest of me. Realistically, I would think they probably won't even catch up or catch on to the fact that these things are a thing of the past, and that will be down to us to advise them. In the absence of any new appropriate standards to point to, the best we can hope for is that we can indicate, strength in the sort of maturing ITAD market, and take the broad guidance off of, for example, the membership of ADISA perhaps, or lean on the expertise of the people at the big software vendors such as Blancco. I mean, I don't know, unless there's significant investment that leads to some centrally developed standards, I don't really see there's going to be anything to point to.
We need to talk about the trust model here a little bit, because Jeff Dean, who I love, Jeff, if you're watching, hello, ex-Marine counterintelligence, always says trust then verify, and I think that's a good mantra for everybody to have, certainly where security is concerned. It's the verification, so I can trust, but I need to verify, and this was where, again, certifications and standards, that's part of the verification process is important. Fred, again, coming back to your experience at Blancco, and this isn't about Blancco, this is about being a professional software house. You take the verification, trust us, but then let's prove it quite seriously. Yeah, and certainly we've tested your products over the years. What's your view on the broader software vendor market space? I have to be careful because it's peer-to-peer. Are you seeing the same type of approach from other software houses, without mentioning names, to the verification stage? We have a product, it works, but we need to have verification.
Yeah, first of all, just to highlight, verification is absolute key, because drives can behave in different ways. There might be new drivers, etc. So you really need to work carefully with the verification component. False positives is the worst thing that we can see from our side of the industry. And you have to invest a lot of money into constantly maintaining your software portfolio, making sure that we can handle new interfaces and updates from different manufacturers. So it's a constant race, and not everyone will have the resources to be on the same level. So there are differences between vendors and vendor approaches, definitely.
What are the drive manufacturers playing their part in this? Because we've done a little bit of research this past week, trying to find the true size, native size of some drives, and the information is not in the public domain, and that's extremely challenging. Could the drive manufacturers be doing more to help the sanitization process?
I think so. I think it would be a better cooperation between the the manufacturers of controllers, as well as the core drive components, as well as the software companies working with sanitization and other sort of utility add-ons on top. Because if we have that closer industry dialogue, it's happening, it's evolving, but my wish would be that it would become even stronger, and you're interfacing between the hardware and software layers a bit more actively. But it is happening and it is developing.
So 15 minutes is too short, as I always say. So we're up to time here. Now, normally I would pop up. I'm taking part in this one because I'm interested. I'm going to summarize if I can, because this is just wetting people's whistles about it. James, from your side as an ITAD vendor, you're seeing confusion from your customer base in terms of the specification. They're misspecifying and leaving themselves exposed to errant operators to deliver what they've been told to, but that isn't what the customer really needs. And so they should be looking for a trusted advisor in the market space and using companies who actually care about the outcomes, as opposed to just the transaction. And Fred, I'm hearing from you that it's challenging, that it's a constant process of maintaining the consistency of the output of your software such that the outcomes for the ITADs is maintained as well. And the reassurance and confidence within the process is all about the software house behind the product, not necessarily about the product itself. So on that note, I'm going to say it's 15 minutes. I've gone over 16 minutes. Oops, naughty. I'm going to say thank you very much, chaps. This is a huge area with the demise of CPA here in the UK, and I know internationally it's pointed out as well. There's a bit of a hole. We're seeing more and more challenges in terms of technology, and compliance to standards is difficult because the standards are not real world requirements. You're not able to comply with them because I either may not know it's there or I can't mount the device in that way to enable me to put the command to it. And so it's about evolution from a fixed point certification or approval of a product into an ongoing approval of a product through a proper vendor and through a proper partner who's implementing that product appropriately. And so my sort of parting comment is, I think this is a challenging environment. It's growing and changing, but I think the solutions are there. We see them because we come and do forensics at you, James. We try and recover data after the event. And Fred, we test products like Blancco and others. So I think it can be done, but it requires intelligence, and it requires people to understand the limitations of standards and certifications and to own the problem, take part in it, speak to Blancco, White Canyon, who we've just bought, UI, Certis, others, etc., and speak to your ITAD partner. So I'm going to say thank you very much. If you can stay online, we'll carry on the conversation. Hopefully ITAD in 15, you've enjoyed it. The next one's out in a few weeks' time, and we'll make sure you get details of that. If you have questions for the speakers, it'll stay live. You can put it in the chat because we're going to go backstage now. But thank you for everybody for listening. Enjoy the rest of your days. And thank you, Fred. Thank you, James.
No worries.